just for the hands because I can't see the hands.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't. We lost
Phil. Who's that? Getting dressed.
Okay, we are now live on YouTube. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Right. Welcome, members, officers, and any members of the public who are zooming in. Let's start the executive of the 17th of August with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There are no apologies.
Okay, thank you. Members of the executive, are you happy with the minutes from the 20th of July? Are you happy for me to sign them?
Great.
Right. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations on any issues that we're going to be discussing this evening? And that includes any members who are zooming in. Okay, I will just remind members that we can't see electronic hands, so feel free to wave vigorously. Okay, all right, no declarations of interest. Thank you. Okay, questions from members. Are there any questions from members? Anyone at all? Anyone? Yeah, anyone? Yeah, anybody at all? No. Councillor Deitch.
Thank you, Leader. As you know, I'm on holiday at the moment, but a resident pointed me to a post on the Surrey Heath Liberal Democrat Facebook page today, which I think needs some clarification. The Surrey Heath Lib Dem group of this council claims today that due to them raising issues of the Afghan crisis with the Chief Executive Officer, this council has agreed to take 5 families to be resettled in this borough. They attempt to create some kind of false illusion that this action has been taken in the last 24 hours. I have 2 questions for you. 1, is this true? As it is my understanding that the executive committee of this council agreed to resettle 5 Afghan families at its July meeting. And 2, will this council do everything it can in its power to offer even more assistance where it's viable to do so?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Deitch. It's not for me to comment on other parties' posts, etc. Certainly not in here. What I can do is I can lay out, as I recall, the situation. I can give you an update as to where we are. So the Secretary of State wrote to chief execs and leaders of councils, I think it was something like the 1st of July. So it was only, what, 6 weeks ago, requesting that we accommodate Afghan locally employed staff. So mostly interpreters, anyone else helping the British forces in Afghanistan. And it was clear to me and obviously to the administration that we had to do something. The government were saying people needed to be evacuated from Afghanistan. They needed to be accommodated, rehoused in the UK, and they were asking all boroughs and districts to step up. And so we had to take, it was clear we had to take as many families as we could, housing obviously being a limiting factor. Councillor Garrett brought an urgent action to the next executive in July, I think the 20th of July. At that time, I guess the danger to the families and to those men and women who were serving with our troops, for want of a better word, I suppose the danger was theoretical. But as we've seen on the news recently, it's not just theoretical, it's absolutely real. And there's no doubt in my mind that the action that this council took to offer housing to a number of families, I don't doubt that actually those families would probably be murdered in their home country if we hadn't have gotten them out. So I'm glad we did. I'm pleased to report that actually the first family, a couple with their 4-year-old, and a second family, a couple with 18-month-old, have actually landed in Surrey Heath and have got accommodation and are fitting in well. they've settled in. Another 3 families, interestingly, all with babies less than 18 months old, are on their way in and will be arriving over the next 3 weeks. I'm absolutely certain that I speak for every single councillor that we wish them a very long and happy life in the UK and in Surrey Heath. Right. I'd also like to say well done to Councillor Garrett for acting so quickly when he recognised that this needed to be done, and actually to all the group leaders who supported this action from the administration. I think, to go to your second point, Councillor Deach, we'll do everything we possibly can. We have agreed to take 5 families. Now, 5 is a small number, there's no doubt about that. I have to say it's 5 more than many other boroughs and districts are taking. Right. There's a surprisingly, disappointingly small number of boroughs and districts so far have agreed to take families, and we were one of the first that said we would take families. The constraint on how many we can take is, of course, accommodation. But I can say to you, I'm absolutely sure that the administration will do everything it can to support those families coming in, and also to do anything else we can bring any more families in. Okay, I hope that answers your question.
Certainly gives some clarification as to the actual course of events. So thank you for that, Leader.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? Councillor Bates?
Thank you. I don't wish to get drawn in kind of social media political things, which I've not seen or am in the least bit interested in. But in terms of refugees, I am interested in that. Can I therefore ask the administration, some years ago, we had a similar situation when it related to Syrian refugees, and the then administration decided eventually, after some pushing, to have 10 households that they would commit to. But my understanding was that at this stage, only 5 or less than 10 have actually been settled into Surrey Heath. Now, I guess I just want reassurance. I'm certainly pleased at the action being taken in regard to Afghanistan, which was swift and rightly so. But can we just be reassured that this is firstly going to be an ongoing process, and secondly that the any gaps that remain in relation to Syrian refugee families, that situation hasn't improved in Syria, that we continue to ensure that those households are also housed as far as is possible. Can we also make sure as a council on a non-political basis that we get the comms on this right? That isn't a criticism of anybody now, but that we also have families in this borough who don't have housing. But I have to say, as an Old Dean councillor, as indeed is Councillor Garrett, the needs of those families are desperate, but they're less desperate than the lives of the Afghan families that we're talking about, who literally are coming with nothing. You know, the Old Dean families that we have are people in great need and poverty, but they have something, as little as that may be. So the needs of the Syrian refugee families, I still think, is important and should not be forgotten in this wider concern about Afghan families, which is rightly so.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. I think, first of all, let me assure you of one thing. You're right, absolutely right, that the administration agreed to take 10 families, Syrian refugees, and I think at the last count we are at 5, and that is obviously well below when we had expected to have had 10 by now. And I'm happy, I'll just go back to those in a second, but the point I want to make is that we're still committed to taking 10 families, refugees from Syria, and that's in addition to the 5 families that we're taking from Afghanistan. It is not 5 plus 5 makes 10, it's 5 plus 10 makes 50, okay? You make a really, really good point, and it was one of the things that Councillor Garrett and I discussed when we talked about doing the urgent action to provide accommodation for 5 families from Afghanistan when we have people who are absolutely desperate for housing in Surrey Heath now. And it came down to exactly the point that you make. Right? The people who are currently housed and needing rehoused have something. And more importantly, and I don't want to be, this sounds melodramatic, but there was a risk to life and limb for the 5 families, not just the people who'd worked with the British forces, but also their families. And there was an urgency that had to be dealt with. And so I think it was right to give up accommodation to 5 families from Afghanistan, as opposed to the people at the top of the housing list right now. And I hope they would understand, although I understand that's a very difficult situation. Going back to the Syrian refugees, the issue really is that although we committed to 10 and we still have 5 vacancies, as it were, we're actually struggling with the type of family that we can accommodate, both in terms of size, and also many of the families coming out of Syria now require very, very special needs that we're not equipped to actually deal with. And so, I don't want to go into the details, but there's grading of families in terms of how much support they have, and the number of families that are in the grades that we can accommodate is actually very few and far between. But those are still available, and we still want to work to get them into get out of the situation they're in right now. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Bates.
Thank you. It answers in part. In terms of the comms, though, can we just be very positive in terms of the comms around this? Because actually, irrespective of any party political matters, which I will leave for one side, the issue here is that what we don't want are some people getting involved in a them and us situation. You've correctly judged it, in my view, in terms of the needs of these communities as opposed to the needs of people that we know. But nonetheless, that is an issue that we do need to make sure is engaged with in our wider communities. There is far too much racism on social media, for example, and that to me needs challenging, and it needs challenging by all of us actually in a non-political basis, irrespective of our party backgrounds and beliefs. So I think there's a role for us to play in that, and I would hope this council is at the forefront of it.
I'm happy to agree with that, Councillor Bates. Okay, any other questions for me or any portfolio holder on their executive responsibilities? No. Okay, I don't see anyone waving vigorously. So we will move on to item 5, containing outbreak management fund. Councillor Mansfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, members, this is the summary basically is to notify the executive of a successful bid for funding from the Contained Outbreak Management Fund, COMF in brackets. The recommendation is the executive is advised to resolve that part 1, the funding received from the Contained Outbreak Management Fund and the expenditure made against tranches 1 and 2 of the funds be noted, and part 2, authority be delegated to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the Environment and Health portfolio holder and Finance portfolio holder to make expenditure from the Contained Outbreak Management Fund against categories set out in Annex A of the report. You have the report before you. The resource implications are basically at 2.1 on page 7. The funding was allocated in 5 tranches. Payment totaling £359,483 was paid for tranches 1 and 2. The council's entitlement for tranches 3 and 5 amounted to £440,146.07p. The total comp allocation for the council from Surrey County Council was therefore £799,584.58. And I would just note, members, if I may take this moment to thank the executive head of community, Tim Passion, for all his work in actually getting this fund allocated to us and all the work that's gone on behind the scenes. So, members, basically the recommendation is the executive is asked to resolve. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Mansfield on the paper? Okay. I think this is a really good paper. I think it's interesting now that when it comes to COVID, this paper is looking to do 2 things. It's now no longer about fighting, it's now about recovery from COVID. And also interestingly, and perhaps menacingly, it's about getting ready or preparing readiness for a resurgence or even what comes after COVID. Because I don't think the experts are saying this is going to be a one-off. And so this fund, and it's substantial, of course, this fund is now about, as it mentions in here, legacy, so that we can actually get something in place ready for anything coming in the future. Okay. All right. Okay. So there don't appear to be any more questions. All right. So as per Councillor Mansfield's statement, the executive is asked to resolve small 1 and small 2. It's already been read out by Councillor Mansfield. Are we in agreement, members?
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you. Right. Item 6, disabled facility grant. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Leader. The council provides disabled facility grants, DFGs, to disabled residents to provide essential adaptations to their homes. The maximum DFG award is set at 30,000, although local authorities can, with a policy in place, add additional discretionary funding. The council has a home assistance policy that allows the housing service manager discretion to award additional funding where there are not avenues of funding available. This is capped at 15,000. The Council Home Improvement Agency has a case where a full DFG has been awarded along with the discretionary 15,000 and the top up from social services. The cost of works is still not covered by £15,000, including contingency. The executive is advised to resolve that the housing service manager be authorised to provide a discretionary top up to disabled facilities grant to enable the adaptation of the disabled resident's home up to the value of £15,000. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Councillor Garrett? Councillor Bates, I saw your hand up, but if I may, if you would just forgive me for a second. Councillor Betton, you obviously raised this question about this. I think we can't talk about, obviously, with GDPR, the individual that's involved or anything, but this was a question that you raised at council. So I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity if you wanted to ask anything.
No, I think, thank you, Leader. It's since my question, it would appear that the portfolio, yourself and the Chief Executive have taken appropriate action, and this, providing everybody agrees, this issue is going to be resolved fairly shortly. And for that, I thank you. That's all I would like to say on the matter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bates?
Thank you. I mean, I certainly have no issue with the decision that's been made, and as far as I'm aware, I don't know the case, but I'm assuming it's in Councillor Betton's area. Can I just suggest, though, that you actually do look at the Home Assistance Review Policy, because it does strike me, looking at the actual works here, that although this has not happened before, there's a fair chance that this is going to happen again. And or certainly that even if it's not at this amount, it will be above the current policy. So that doesn't appear to be in the recommendation, although it is suggested in 12.2 as something to review within the report. The other point which I would make, and I suppose is more of a question really, as to in terms of future way forward. I have no doubt that this particular piece of work is done professionally and all the rest of it. But when I look at consultancy fees as a percentage of base works, that obviously does raise ethical issues in terms of ensuring that that piece of work is then the appropriate piece of work rather than the most expensive piece of work. And we do it in regard to a consultancy fee and what's described as an SHBC agency fee. So I guess I would just want reassurance from officers that that is the usual way of doing things, that recommendations are quickly checked, because obviously this would need to be urgently dealt with, these types of works. But obviously when we're looking at consultants taking a fee on a base cost, then that is something that we just need to double check. As I say, I'm sure this has been done absolutely right and professionally and all the rest of it, but we just should reassure ourselves when that kind of arrangement is in place.
Okay, thank you. Just taking those two questions in, Councillor Garrett. The first one was, Councillor Bates is right, 12.2 talks about recommendation to review the home assistance policy, but it's not in the recommendations. Are you happy for that to be added into the recommendations?
Yes, it is something we've discussed, and I would be happy to add that into the recommendation.
Okay, and his second question regarding percentages and how that's going to be reviewed.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Bates. It's actually a question I asked because this is all new to me, and I was asking similar questions. So I have actually asked the officers, and they have confirmed to me that we don't always take the lowest quotation, and we do follow up on references, previous work done, and all of this is also subject to audit as well. So based on all of that and the background work that's done, I'm happy that the system is in place, that there will be no improprieties, which is what you're basically suggesting, and I totally get that. So yeah, I'm happy based on the feedback from the officers. The system that's in place should pick up on any of those issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Gann. Okay, are there any other questions on this paper? Okay, I have one that it occurred to me. I have to say, I'm giving you a heads up with this question, but we're about to, it looks like, agree a 60k plus sum of works to someone's property, and I'm guessing we don't own the property, but that will add value to the property. For one thing, it's putting in a bathroom, albeit very specialised for the needs of that individual. At some point, if the property is sold, I guess that's just, is that gone, or is there some kind of charge on the property, or is that just the way the game's played?
So again, a question that I asked because so it was something else that I was thinking about. And I've spoken to Mr. Passion on this, and he's explained to me that firstly, if someone has had all this work done to the house, it's unlikely that someone else is going to want that house. And that's not because the house isn't going to be very nice, it's because the specific work that is being done is for that particular resident. But we do take out I don't want to call it an insurance, I suppose, to a certain extent, that if once this work's done, and generally, please bear in mind that the work we're talking about here is actually, it's not normal to be spending this sort of money. Usually it's a lot less than this, maybe £5,000 to £10,000. But we do take out a clause which basically means that within a 10-year period, if the resident wishes to move out, we can actually ask for that money to be repaid. Not that I'm assuming that happens very often, because as I say, the value is a lot higher than we normally spend. But I think I've pretty much covered that, unless Mr. Passion would like to say anything else.
Chairman, yes, it's the amount of work is secured as a local land charge on the property, and that's for a period of 10 years. But it is a maximum of £10,000, and that is in the legislation rather than anything that we've imposed.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if there are no other questions. Members of the executive, sorry? Oh, Councillor Betton.
Thank you. I just would make a comment on your supposition that it increases the value of a house, unless the house is sold by and bought by someone with a similar disability. The first thing that people do is to rip it all out if it's going to somebody else. So it really is not actually adding value unless it becomes a disabled house.
Sure. No, I understand that, Councillor Betton. And in normal circumstances, as Councillor Garrett has said, we're in the 10 to 15,000, 30,000 range. This one just happens to be, we're building an extension. So it may well be converted, but it wouldn't be knocked down. So, okay. Right. Okay, members. We are advised to resolve that the Housing Services Manager be authorised to provide a discretionary top-up to a disabled facilities grant to enable the adaptation of a disabled resident's home up to the value of £15,000. That's obviously above the 30 plus the 15 that's discretionary. So that'd be 60 in total. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Any addition?
Oh, you're correct. Okay. And as Councillor Garrett has agreed, we're going to add in the recommendation that we review the home assistance policy as per 12.2. Okay, thank you. Right. Right, we've reached the end of part 1. We now recommend that be resolved that under Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities, Regulations 2012, the public and press are excluded from the meeting. Are we agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much, anyone who is offline, for joining us.
Yes. Oh my God. When?
I didn't go to work.
We can just wait a moment.